affected me as a self-employed. Things were a bit tight for a little while. COVID did affect me originally back in March when the whole country shut down. I was lucky enough to spend the first 3 months not working.
Really everything in lockdown was online, but it was nice when you could just video call someone and see their face.
Hi Aidan, how you doing?
COVID did also make an effect on people's hobbies and their health.
In lockdown, I wasn't able to play any football and not able to meet up with my friends. So I think it may have made me more healthy because I was doing lots of working out at home.
What hobbies did you start during lockdown?
I first started knitting and my grandma taught me it, and from then I really loved it.
I probably started to paint a lot because I felt very calm because I was off school and everything like that. I couldn't see all my friends, so it calmed me down a lot and I got less frustrated that I couldn't go see my friends. What couldn't you do in lockdown that you enjoy?
I missed playing with my friends, going around to their house, so now I'm really happy that I can do it now.
I couldn't do a lot of running. I really enjoy running because I'm good at it. You enjoy it mostly if you're good at it, so I love running, but the athletic club were closed and I was really angry, but I did get to do a little bit of running at home, not that much though.
I think that, well, we've seen programmes about Arctic and whatever, there's places that are melting and it's affecting all sorts of wildlife like polar bears and the ice caps are melting. The snowstorm?
Yeah, so early in November.
I think that's not... I'm not sure. I think the wind is a different aspect to it, but it's definitely snowed in November before. I remember it snowing in November before. Well, I have this conversation with my mum every now and again because my mum is, what can I say, kind of sceptical. And so the conversation I have with her to try to encourage her is to say, even if we don't know, if, you know, I'm no scientist and I'm just going by what I see on the news, and my feeling is that if there's anything that we can do to slow down the rate that the planet is getting hotter, if there's measures that we can, if there's just small steps that we can take, it's like anything, isn't it? It's there aren't always going to be, one person can't make a drastic change, but if we can all do a little bit of something, then hopefully that will help.
To most people, autumn smells of...
What does it smell like to you?
nothing. The ability to smell, I think, is something that a lot of people take for granted. You don't often stop and think about how different life would be without it. The way you look at your world will completely change. Your taste changes and your nose is just a decoration on your face. I've lived 15 years of my life like that, and I would say most of my friends probably don't even know. I mean, I don't blame them. You would look it up and nothing comes up. Maybe like 2 articles from the early 2000s and a couple of pictures of noses. But really, we were just forgotten and not really known about as a whole group of people.
What changed?
Well, the pandemic came. Suddenly people were relating to us. People were saying that they'd lost their sense of smell too due to COVID. And it was kind of like people finally understood. If the pandemic came with anything positive, then that was 100% it. Being congenitally anosmic is completely different from acquiring anosmia at some point during your life. People would say, oh, my food tastes funny, but for me, that's just taste. Nothing's changed at any point. And then what really sets us apart is the fact that they have the chance to get it back. Get it back to smell training. Sniffing the same 4 scents every day for a month, and your smell comes back. To me, that's kind of like magic. Like, I could never do that. That's not going to make an olfactory bulb grow in my nose. But nowadays, the word anosmia means a lot more to people. And don't get me wrong, I still have to answer the same question every single time. But it definitely made an impact. We have these posters around our school that say if you have a loss or change in your sense of smell. And I think that's great. They're noticing that the people who have lost their sense of smell doesn't mean we have COVID. Doesn't mean I've spent 15 years of my life with COVID. That's not true. It just means that I'm a little bit different. And they are showing that in just a random poster they've got around the school. And it's little things like that that have only happened due to this pandemic.
A study confirms that many have lost their sense of smell due to COVID.
A loss of sense of smell is one of the first symptoms of a COVID-19 infection. Is there any way to reverse it?
These impacts will likely translate to medical and quality
Do
of
people
life
really
problems.
live like this?
Is there anything else you want to add?
Next time you smell something, just remember that there are some people out there who can't smell that, and I don't care if it's a bad smell, just appreciate that you have something that some people in this world don't have yet.
To go further.
LGBTQ plus are people who identify with specific labels and identities that help themselves feel comfortable with their own body, such as gender, sexuality, and stuff like that.
The only thing we learnt about that was in PSC, where we watched this film about AIDS.
Uh-huh. So you were concealing your illness?
That's correct.
Didn't you have an obligation to tell your employer you had this dreaded, deadly, infectious disease?
In year 8, my friends came out, and then I learned through her. I'd never heard of it before year 8. Researching on my own and things, that was definitely the major thing that helped me learn about it.
Coming from someone who hasn't had enough support of being gender fluid, teachers just don't use my pronouns, they don't use the right ones, even though I've been made aware that I don't use she.
Although our school had a rainbow room, which is a sort of gay club at lunchtime, it wasn't very well advertised, and you only found out about it based on word of mouth. It was only run by one teacher, and I think it was her prerogative. To be honest, I'm not very sure what they've done to support anybody. The teachers seem to know very little about the LGBT community.
It's important because it spreads awareness on the topic of LGBTQ, and it helps more people understand the terms of LGBTQ+.
I think representation is important because not only does it normalise queer people, just to people who've never met someone they know is queer, they've never interacted with them. It normalises it for them, but it also normalises it for like young queer people and allows them to know that they're not alone, despite how isolated they may be feeling. I think the reveal that Loki's bisexuality and gender fluidities was pretty awful, to be honest. I think it's good that they actually finally included like a canonically bi character, but I think it's not as good representation as it's touted to be. It was only a few lines. It's never been. There's no evidence to support it. For something to have an impact, you need to be able to see it better.
Must have been would-be princesses, or perhaps another prince.
A bit of both.
The gender fluid thing, that was not even mentioned. Like maybe it was in like one and it was like I think it was a picture or something. But unless you're like eagle-eyed looking for it, nobody would be able to spot it. I don't think it counts as representation. To actually work as representation, it has to be something more than just one line or one picture that you can easily cut out of a scene to ship off to foreign markets. No, I don't think that social media is making it trendy, because I think what it's doing is helping to normalise it and to destigmatise it. And I think maybe some kids might see creators they look up to that they think they're cool and be like, oh, I want to be like them, and they might not understand like the significance of it or anything.
Yeah, there was a trend on TikTok where people would pretend to be bisexual mostly, and they were like, oh my god, yeah, I'm so cool, trendy, bi, and it was like a stereotype. There was very like harmful stereotypes that people thought they were obliged to follow to feel a certain sexuality.
But I don't think it's being gay or being trans isn't a trend, and it's not something they can choose or turn off and on. And so yeah, I think it can't be a trend. I think all it's doing is just allowing people to come to terms with themselves easier, and it's allowing them to talk about it easier. So it just seems like there's more of it now. But I don't think that's the case.
Social media can have like a really harmful impact on LGBTQ plus people. It just has a very negative impact. There are some positive impacts for it, like offering support websites, like stuff where you can just talk about your like feelings about it, how to like find your label if you want to label yourself. But it mainly has more of a negative impact with the homophobia, transphobia, pretty much anything like that. Love Pride. I've wanted to go to a Pride for like a Pride parade for quite a while. There's one not far from here in September, I think, and my sister went and she said it was like amazing. And I just love to go to a Pride event. It would be.
This is Extinction Rebellion. Extinction Rebellion was a movement founded in 2018 to help inform people about the climate crisis through peaceful protest. This is a very interesting topic to me, as I am very interested in global warming and the climate crisis and how we can play our part to help. My second cousin Ellie is a member of this group, and she agreed to let me interview her, so I went to find out more. This is Ellie. Can you give like a quick introduction to yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm currently studying textiles design, and I have been a member of Extinction Rebellion for about 2.5 years now. And I work with the fashion group within Extinction Rebellion.
Cool. So I just have a couple of questions that I was going to ask you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like the ultimate aim, do you think, behind Extinction Rebellion? Like, what is it all about? Why was it formed? Where was it?
So we have three main aims. Now this is going to test me, do I remember? So tell the truth, act now, beyond politics. So these were the three aims that were sort of set up with the movement in 2018. And we basically thought that the UK government, and I mean all of the governments across the globe, weren't really telling the truth about the climate emergency. And so that was one of the aims, to tell the truth. And I feel like that's nearly been achieved, because since the sort of formation of Extinction Rebellion, the climate emergency has been in the newspapers so much more, and there's been a lot more conversation on the BBC about sort of environmental matters. But yeah, I said the other aim was beyond politics. So Extinction Rebellion sort of calls for a citizens' assembly to decide on sort of how to get out of this crisis and what we can do going forward. So a citizens' assembly is sort of assigned people from throughout society, and they spend like a week getting trained up and being educated about the emergency that we're in, and then they decide on how we're going to address it and what we're going to do going forward, rather than politicians deciding, because A, they're not always as informed as they could be, and B, they have alternative reasons for not sort of pushing forward with legislation.
There is another question then. Could you tell me about some of your more recent protests that you've done? Like, just to give people an idea of like what kind of work you guys do.
Yeah, so there's usually a international rebellion which happens probably twice a year. So that's when sort of cities across the globe all come together, usually in the capital city of a country. So there's always a lot of actions in London, and they basically put loads of pressure in that city through sort of sitting in the road, targeted actions, to try and get that government to listen and try and get that government to do something about the climate emergency. So probably my most recent big protest was, what did we do at the last rebellion? So with the fashion group, it was more of a fun sort of protest. We just did like a big flash mob. It was called the Toxic System Rave. And yeah, it was more of an outreach action. So we wanted to tell people about what's happening within the fashion industry and how destructive their clothes are, and why they should sort of stop shopping at H&M and all these other high street shops that aren't very good for the climate or the people that make the clothes. Another big one we did recently, I don't know if you saw this online, it was outside the Bank of England, and there was a few people that sprayed the front of the Bank of England with black paint, which was supposed to be oil, and it was sort of relating the fossil fuel companies to the banks and how sort of our money in the bank is being lent to fossil fuel extraction. And that was quite a spicy action. So I made the costumes for that, and it got in a lot of the press. It got a lot of coverage. And yeah, those rebels were arrested immediately. Another one I'm forgetting, sorry. So with my group, we barricaded Selfridges, which is like a luxury department store in London. And we made this really long dress, and we had 5 people wearing the dress, and they all glued on to the front of Selfridges. And then we poured oil over them. And that was sort of to raise awareness about luxury fashion, and luxury fashion is just as bad for the planet as fast fashion is. And people often sort of forget about luxury fashion. So yeah, that was one of the most recent that was impactful.
So yeah, as another question, you've mentioned a few times that you're part of the fashion group. So like mainly within the fashion group, what are the aims for the, more specifically the fashion group, and what are the things that you like specialize in doing?
Yeah, so the fashion group is Fashion Action, we're called. And probably the main aim is for the fashion industry to use its platform to tell the truth about the climate emergency and act on that truth and stop producing or really reduce production. And we want to encourage consumers to stop over consuming clothes, stop using them as throwaway disposable things. We host a lot of mending and repair workshops. So we sort of sit in the street and teach people to sew and repair their clothes, and how to knit and how to make new things rather than buy new things. So we partner with a lot of other fashion groups. There's a group called Fashion Act Now and Fashion Revolution, and we quite often work in partnership with them. And sort of we do their work on the streets and they do the work with big corporations and business, because that's where they have their links. It's all needed to sort of push the fashion industry to stop producing at this time of emergency.
Obviously, you're part of the fashion group. What are the other like main groups within Extinction Rebellion?
So the structure is really complicated. So you have XR as a whole, and then within the UK you have local groups. You probably have a local group near you. Every tiny region of the UK has a group, and they're called local groups. And then there's also more specialist groups. So groups looking at targeting certain industries. So there's Fashion Action, there's Ocean Rebellion, who looks at sort of protesting for the oceans. There's Animal Rebellion, which has got really big. I'm also a part of Animal Rebellion, and that's the side of reducing animal agriculture for the climate. What other groups are there? There's Money Rebellion, who specifically looks at banking and the link to fossil fuels. There's loads of sort of different groups specializing in different parts of industry, because obviously they're mostly formed out of people in that industry. So how Fashion Action started was a couple of fashion designers and fashion students got together and were really angry at the industry, and that's how it was born, really. I don't know if you know about the High Speed Rail 2 project, HS2. It's basically a high speed train that's going to go from London to, I think it's Leeds, which sounds like a really eco-friendly way of transport, but it's actually really, really destructive, and it's destroying 108 ancient woodlands across the UK. So they're deforesting all these woodlands for the train route, and it's not going to be carbon neutral for something like over 100 years, and it's billions and billions of pounds worth of the taxpayer money. So yeah, this group have been really successful in sort of stopping or delaying the deforestation of these trees. And yeah, they've sort of been tying themselves to the trees, sleeping in trees, living in trees for over 2 years to try and delay the project. So much so that the government might eventually cancel it. And I think it was at the beginning of the year or the end of last year, there was a couple of activists that actually tunneled underneath Euston Station, where they wanted to fell a load of trees. And they were living under this tunnel, in this tunnel under the ground for like a couple of weeks to try and stop them from cutting the trees down. But unfortunately they got evicted in the end, and yeah, they cut the trees down, which is really sad. But yeah, they're a really great group to look into, especially if you're looking into sort of direct action and peaceful direct action.
Talking about like direct action and things, it's got to really annoy you and things as well when you hear these like companies on the news saying we promise to be like net neutral by like 2050 or 2030, and you're like, yeah, that's still a good few years, and you could change a lot of things a lot easier than you're making it out to be. Surely that's got to be very frustrating as well.
Yes, it is. And especially because 2050 is way too late. It's very much too late. And I think companies always say 2050 because it's a long way in the future and they haven't got to think about it just yet. They haven't got to factor it into their finances or their planning for the year. So they choose this target in the future because it's the easy way out.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've heard of this term greenwashing.
Heard of it? I don't really know what it means.
It's just where corporations have this green persona, but they don't actually mean any of it. It's just to stop them getting targeted by groups like us. They pretend they're green and eco-friendly when they're really not. They're just disguising it.
Yeah. What is like a way you can often tell the greenness, if you like, of a company? By what? Because I know like if you the way that people have, they thought of a million ways to say the word palm oil, just so you don't know what it is, but they're still saying it. Like, yeah, things like that you've got to kind of watch out for, because yeah, I know what you mean, but like, is there like a way of telling, or do you just kind of have to go by what they say unless you know otherwise?
It is really hard to find out. I think you just have to do the research yourself, which is really sad because obviously a lot of people don't have time or even know to research about HSBC or Barclays or H&M, for example. They just assume that what H&M is telling them is the truth. For me, I watched quite a lot of sort of getting into the fashion stuff. I watched a lot of documentaries, and that's sort of how I found out. And on these documentaries, there were people from the communities that were affected by fast fashion production, and they were sort of saying they were telling the truth, and sort of exposing these big brands and what they've been saying about their green credentials.
What would you say would you advise people do to help with the climate crisis stuff from like Extinction Rebellion's point of view? What do you think that people could do to help more than anything else?
From Extinction Rebellion's point of view, it would probably be to join in with direct action. which doesn't mean you have to get arrested. It's just, help in whatever way you can. So there's various roles. There's block printing flags, there's arrestee support, so you help at the police station. There's organising protests. There's well-being. So we have like well-being groups and regen groups, which sort of just make sure everyone's feeling okay and doing okay in a protest. There's de-escalation. So people go and speak to people, the public, that might be quite angry and frustrated if we're blocking a road, and they sort of calm people down. So there's all these different roles that don't involve being arrested. And probably that's the only way, if we sort of get loads of people to mobilise and really push the government to actually do something. That's probably one of the best ways. But also from my perspective, not necessarily Extinction Rebellion's perspective, I feel like there's a lot of things you can do, like reducing meat and dairy consumption, not buying as much stuff, not buying as many clothes, not buying as many gadgets, things that you don't need, and also researching where these things come from. Something, I can't remember who the quote is by now, but there's maybe someone from Fashion Revolution. She said, when you're buying a garment, really question whether you're going to wear this more than 30 times, and if you're not, then don't buy it. And I think that's something I always consider now when I'm buying clothes, even if they're secondhand. Like, am I going to wear that more than 30 times in its life? Like, is it going to be worthwhile? And I think all these small things can really be impactful if everyone sort of takes responsibility for their consumption patterns, especially because we are so lucky here in the global north that we have so many luxuries, and we really do take it for granted. And sort of our choices are really impacting people in the global south without us even being conscious of that.
Thank you for watching this documentary. I hope it's told you a little bit more about Extinction Rebellion and how to get involved if you're interested, and also about the climate crisis in general and about how we can all play our part to help in this global issue. Thanks again for watching.